Hello and welcome to Security Scan. I am Uday Bhaskar. This week, we focus on what may well be the most significant political development of the year, namely the transition in the United States of America from the Obama to the Trump presidency. US President-elect Donald Trump will assume office on January 20th, and the arrival of the new incumbent in the White House has aroused considerable global interest, laced with a subtext of anxiety. Anxiety predicated on uncertainty, triggered in the main by the lack of clarity or consistency about what kind of policy initiatives the new American president will embark upon. From Mr. Trump's public articulation, largely the many tweets that he's associated with, it appears that the USA may review its major power relations, particularly the bilaterals with Russia and China, as also the traditional American military allies such as Japan and South Korea and the European Union. During his election campaign, Mr. Trump threatened to review the Iranian nuclear deal and come down heavily on jihadi terrorism, amongst other initiatives. What does this transition from Obama to Trump mean for Indian security and the global strategic framework? To discuss this, we have an eminent panel as always. Allow me to welcome and introduce Ambassador Jayant Prasad, the Director General of the IDSA, Dr. C. Rajamohan, Director, Carnegie India, and Lieutenant General S.L. Narasimhan, formerly Commandant of the Army War College in Mao. All of them experts in India-US relations for many years. Ambassador Prasad, if I could turn to you first. You have dealt with America for a fairly long period when you were in the MEA. How would you characterize the arrival of Mr. Trump, and what do you think the anxiety and fear that has been generated about major policy change? Do you think it's valid?
To a degree, it is valid, but to predict how President-elect Trump is going to impact on India and the world is very hard. It's very hard because the President-elect is both inexperienced and unpredictable, as his tweets have been showing. I think there will be two big hallmarks of his presidency. One would be dexterity and the other deal-making. A lot of us have forgotten that in the year 2000, 16 years ago, President-elect Trump considered seriously running for the presidency as a candidate of the Reform Party. And he issued a paper at that time, authored by him. And there he said that in international diplomacy, the days of chess playing was over because there were no longer two superpowers in the world. The world had become, he did not say that, more polycentric. The US was the preeminent power then. And he said that deal making will be the hallmark of future US foreign policy, many balls in the air, and how they fall would shape the direction of policy. He doesn't fall under any broad label. He's certainly not a traditional conservative or a Republican. He's certainly not a neocon. Indeed, most of the neocons who worked with President George W. Bush dissociated themselves from President-elect much before election day. They said that if he got elected, they would have nothing to do with him. So we are in a little bit of uncharted territory, but not so uncharted as we cannot make out the contours of future policy. And there are two very short points I want to make. One is that they say that he will be more unilateralist. US foreign policy has always had a strong streak of unilateralism. It is not correct to say that President Obama was less unilateral than President George W. Bush. There is only a difference of shades between them.
But Dr. Rajamohan, if I could bring you in, now there's one view which says that Mr. Trump, once he's in the White House, will be a hard con, and one can alliterate on the word hard and whether it's conservative or just conning the world at large. How would you characterize Mr. Trump, and what should we expect?
I think we should be prepared for a major discontinuity in the US policies.
Disruptive.
Yeah. I think normally you would expect that a politician would say things during election. After the election in the US, you go back, wink, wink, nod, nod, you've gone back to the old policies. But I think what we've heard and seen from President-elect Trump, he has shown some consistency. One, I think he's made it very clear he's going to stand against the logic of globalization that has driven the United States all these years. He's warning the American companies that if they don't come back and produce in the US, there will be severe consequences. He is going to build a wall, he said again last week. So the ideas of globalization that were so central to the US, of open immigration, free trade, both these are under severe challenge under Trump presidency. Second, I think he's saying the US has, under the previous governments, after the Cold War, has spent too much energy outside doing all kinds of crazy things. He's going to say, look, we're going to follow American interests. We're not going to try and involve ourselves in every single conflict. Therefore, there'll be some considered retrenchment and telling the allies, look, guys, you want me to help you, you pay me more or do more yourself. This is a fundamentally new approach to American alliances in Eurasia that could have consequences. And lastly, I would say that I think the emphasis on American strength, that is, that if somebody hurts them, they're going to hit back. And the idea that, look, if it is Islamic terror, he's going to take very strong positions, but he's not going to go out there and take care of every single problem in the world.
General Narasimhan, if I could just pick up the thread from what Raj has said, as far as India is concerned, we've had two issues that have been very sort of visible when we talk about India's security concerns. One is terrorism, jihadi terrorism, support to such activity, particularly by Pakistan, and now the Chinese support to Pakistan. So that's one cluster. The second is the nuclear issue, which actually brings in Iran. So how would you look at the way in which this is going to, shall we say, unspool as far as India and our security concerns are directly impacted?
Before I come to that, I thought I'll pick this as to how Mr. Trump's stated positions vary from what US has already articulated as a security strategy. Basically, there are 4 or 5 tenets of that security strategy. One is that extremism, which even Mr. Trump has said that he'll go against the extremism aspects. Second is the cyber security. Having seen what happened in the elections, I'm sure he is going to have a look into the cyber security again. Third thing is the aggressive behavior by Russia, which again he has said that there will be a change in the policy. The fourth one is on the unilateral intervention by US in others' affairs, in other parts of the world. Though they were wanting to pitch for a collective kind of a effort, that is going to again undergo a little change. So if you look at these things mainly, and then bringing back to what you asked for, one is on the terrorism front. He has clearly said that he is going to go after the terrorism. Therefore, we can find some kind of a support coming from that side. The second thing is on the nuclear deal. He has already said that he is going to abrogate the Iran nuclear deal. I really don't know whether he will be able to do it at this point in time, but having signed the nuclear, having supported us to get into the nuclear suppliers group, the waivers, and also supporting us to get a membership into the nuclear security group, we can expect some kind of a support from that.
So that would be the continuity part.
Basically, this policy is going to be bipartisan as far as this is concerned.
Jayant, if I could ask you to look at this issue of terrorism, Pakistan, because that's been one of the strands that India and the United States, while in principle being on the same side as far as global terrorism is concerned, it comes up in the QDR every time as a major issue. But policy-wise, there is a dissonance. So do you think this is something that, could have a different sort of look from the White House?
I think the policy inconsistency, Uday, at the time of President Obama was so huge that US forces in Afghanistan were ramped up to 99,000. When I left Afghanistan in 2010, there were 149,000 foreign troops under the ISAF banner, and they were very well armed, unlike the present Afghan National Army. So there will be a refocusing on supplying food, fuel and firepower to Afghan National Army. because the two principal advisors on the defense side, Flynn and Mattis, the national security advisor and the defense secretary, both have been burnt by their experiences
In Afghanistan.
So to that extent, I would say that United States is not going to abandon Afghanistan and will have a more consistent set of policies
But
there.
will they hold Pakistan's feet to the fire on this, or?
Well, Pakistan, unfortunately, will continue to remain an important player because to expect better behavior from Pakistan as a reflection of its former actions is very hard to
And low
imagine.
probability on that.
But without Pakistan's cooperation, you cannot set Afghanistan right. So that dependence on Pakistan, unfortunately, so far as Afghanistan is concerned, is undiminished.
Raj, you want to come in on this? The US policy towards Pakistan, will it be determined by the past?
Because I think if the last 20 years, I think the American administrations have understood the negative role that Pakistan has played. But the paradox, as Ambassador Prasad pointed out, that Pakistan is part of the problem, it's also part of the solution. So therefore, how do you develop a strategy to compel Pakistan to do the right thing? That's not been easy. It's not been possible, in fact, for the previous two administrations. I'm not clear whether he'll succeed in this because after having said a lot of nice things about India, there have been reports about Trump saying nice things about Pakistan as well. Could be that need not necessarily tell you where he's going, but I think that problem will remain of how do you deal with Pakistan in the larger context. But my sense is that the subcontinent is not going to be central to his overall strategy. I think he's taking on the Russians in some senses of redoing the Russia relationship. He's confronting China. Has to rework his alliances. So I would say India should be reasonably well off trying to manage its own environment rather than wait for Trump to do something. So I think he's got bigger fish to fry.
Which I think is a national security imperative that you do your own thing. But Narasimhan, on China, you've been in Beijing, you served over there. The last year, both in terms of the outgoing Obama administration, the way they were trying to deal with China in the South China Seas and their own assertiveness, how would you read the tea leaves, if I may ask you, as far as the US-China relationship under Mr. Trump?
The basic problem that has been there in the last 1 year in that particular relationship is China's behavior both in East China Sea and in the South China Sea. And also the behavior of China as it was seen after that 12th July PCA verdict which came, and the verdict went against the Chinese position. But the reaction to whatever China said has been very muted even from the US. If you see the post-verdict period, the US also didn't react very well and the reaction was very mute. So in the Obama administration, we can say that probably they were trying to increase the cooperation levels with China. But Mr. Trump, in his pre-electoral position as well as after the electoral position, seems to be a little hard-nosed on China as of now. So this is something which we need to wait and see when he takes over and see when he's presented with all the facts and figures, how he is going to leverage this kind of relationship is something that we need to look at. But what we can clearly say is that the US-China relations are in a bit of a flux at this point in time, and it will take some more time to stabilize, because even today in the Chinese media, if you read, they say that probably if Americans are going to go after the Chinese companies in America, then the Chinese will have to look into the American companies in China. So it's going to be a tit for tat kind of a situation that they are in at this moment. But I presume that it will stabilize over a period of time, and then thereafter we need to see as to how this is going to develop.
In the last few weeks, we've seen how the Trump camp has dealt with Taiwan. But we'll come back to that. Jayant, if I could request you really to look at the region, and you served in Afghanistan as ambassador, I want to bring in Iran, because one of the, shall we say, wild cards is in the event Mr. Trump goes back on the Obama deal with Iran, then there are all kinds of paths that open up in terms of the global nuclear issue. So how would you read that particular, shall we say, domain, as it were?
Well, let me briefly look at both the eastern and western flanks. On the western flank, that is something that's going to hurt us very much. If there is a fallout, negative fallout in the US-Iran relationship so dramatic that United States detaches itself from the JCPOA, the nuclear agreement, President-elect has now said that he is not going to scrap the agreement, but he'll hold Iran's nose to it. Now, that is saying that he will keep a close eye on what Iran does on missile testing. Because if the Iran-US relationship deteriorates, many of the initiatives that we have in the region to connect with Central Asia, the North-South corridor, the Chabahar port, the connectivity with Afghanistan, those come under jeopardy. But to go back to the China question, the Chinese immediately, as Rajmohan said, that the Americans are stepping back seemingly under President-elect Trump from contribution to the global public goods. And the America First policy will militate against a whole range of issues which is going to be hurtful to the international community. And the Chinese were preparing very early after his election to demonstrate that they are stepping into the void. Now the Chinese have been thrown into a little bit of imbalance because of Trump's aggressive nature of responses on the Taiwan phone call, on his reaction to the seizure by China outside of the Nan-Dash line of the US undersea drone. Yeah. The Chinese are unsettled by all that, and certainly there seems to be a case that his presidency might be transformative, that he might be willing to play the China card in reverse of what President Nixon had done in 1971. And so there is no question of a G2 between US and China that Xi Jinping tried to achieve with President Obama. There cannot be a going back to that under President Trump.
Raj, the relationship between Washington, Moscow and Beijing, Jayan just spoke about what happened in the Cold War. Now, over the next 10 years, we expect that the global macro economy will be China at #1, United States at #2, and India as a distant third. So, in this decade, how would you read the relationship between US, China, Russia, and what is the fallout on India?
I think many in India hope that improved relations between US and Russia, because President Trump has maintained a very consistent position on this, would be beneficial for India, because I think there is a feeling in Delhi that the Americans have pushed Russia closer to China. Therefore, playing the Russia card against China, as Ambassador Prasad was saying, would be good, and I think it will open up space for us. But I'm not so certain that that things are going to follow so smoothly, because Putin, I think, is trying to position himself with a weak hand, nevertheless, are trying to develop leverage both with the Americans and with the Chinese. Second, I think one of the attempts that Russia and America are doing is to build common ground on ISIS. If they make a common ground on the ISIS, then the whole question, the Russians are already saying ISIS is a bigger threat in Pakistan and Afghanistan than Taliban, therefore let's do a deal with the Taliban. So I think the jockeying between the three of them could produce outcomes that are not all necessarily in our favor. So my view is that, look, we must be more active. We must do things on our own that will make a difference to them, rather than merely expect what they do between each other will be beneficial to us. Therefore, I think we got to be open-minded. We got to be prepared for a lot of dynamism between the three relationships. And at the same time, we need to expand our engagement both with Russia, with Japan, and with the Americans, because our pathways with China have been stalled by the negative approaches of China on a number of issues.
You know, one of the strands I often suggest is that India perhaps has to be multi-engaged, but yet unaligned. I don't know how successful we'll be, but General Narasimhan, one of the visible features, again, you know, the robust aspects of the India-US relationship in the Obama administration has been the steady induction of American military inventory. And now we have got this major defense partner status. So with Mr. Trump wanting to make America great and also keep the jobs, how do you think this is going to fit in with the Modi aspiration of Make in India, and that we would have a very vibrant domestic military industrial complex equivalent in a very modest way?
As you know, sir, the India-US defense relations actually got a boost from the defense cooperation agreement that we signed about 10 years back. Thereafter, there has been a constant improvement in the relationship. And if you see, after the present government has come in and the Make in India campaign has taken off, you found that even the American companies like the ones who are making the F-16, etc., are wanting to set shop in India. And the signing of this major defense partner deal, very close to the transfer of the transfer of power in US, it is going to be bipartisan. It is going to be holding the new government also to that particular agreement. So what I see is that you will find an improvement in the transfer of technology that will come in from the US. The US companies will still be willing to set shop in India, irrespective of the fact that the jobs are otherwise. So I find an overall improvement as far as this is concerned.
Jen, I'm coming back to you as the former JS Americas. It's less than a decade since the India-US relationship has really turned a page. You know, from estranged democracies, now we are engaged democracies, perhaps hesitantly. So what is your read over the next 4 years of Trump in terms of the India-US? You know, will we be able to take it forward in a fairly, shall we say, productive manner for both sides, or we have to keep this whole uncertainty factor in mind?
On broadly security issues, I see greater consonance between India and the United States in broad aspects, also in building up Make in India in defense. However, we have to be very, very watchful of our interests in geoeconomics because America first militates against a number of advantages that we have had in the US market, especially trade in services, movement of skilled personnel to the United States. Our IT companies might come under pressure if there is a dramatic revision of the H-1B visa regime. We are pursuing certain other initiatives. We have not made progress with the previous administrations on totalization agreements. There we have to continue to try. It will be much harder.
So it will be fair to say correspondence on the security strategic, but perhaps not the same in the economic trade investment kind of areas.
You've put it in a more straightforward way. Thank you.
I'm sorry, in the interest of time, Raj, I want to bring you in because you're the Samudra Manthan guy. Maritime domain, a quick Twitter response. What do you foresee for India and the United States?
I think he's talked about building a bigger navy. I think given their challenge in the Chinese case, I think there'll be a lot of space for in India. If it takes leadership in the maritime domain, then it can
hopefully move forward, which is also Prime Minister Modi's advocacy.
Yeah,
so I think we'll have to wait and watch. The Trump presidency will unfold from January 20th. And as our discussion highlighted, while it appears that there may be policy turbulence within the Beltway, this may be misleading. The USA is the world's most prosperous nation by way of GDP and also the most powerful militarily. It is grappling with many internal dissonances, even while trimming its sails, to deal with the imperative of globalization and related economic interdependency on one hand, and the rise of China on the other. All of this is taking place against a rapidly changing global technological profile. Consequently, there is an inherent policy continuity apropos the US national interest and abiding strategic priorities. Hence, it is possible that the Trump presidency may not be as irrationally revisionist as it is expected to be. The USA is a critical interlocutor for India, as it is for the other major powers, and the next few months will provide an indication about the nature of the Trump policy contour in relation to security and strategic matters. On the positive side, it is encouraging to note that there is robust bipartisan support within the USA about the need to nurture the relationship with India. The Modi government is also committed to building on the foundations laid over the last decade, and hopefully the next 4 years will see an appropriate realization of India's strategic aspirations, even while assuaging the security concerns. On that note, allow me to thank my guests.